They came at dawn, without warning. Sirens stayed off, but the violence didn't. ICE agents flooded the apartment like smoke. Silent, choking, everywhere. Camila Vargas was 9 when her father, an undocumented mechanic who fixed cars for free, was thrown face first onto their kitchen floor. No trial, no lawyer, just handcuffs and silence. He never came home. That morning didn't just take her father. It took her belief in fairness. But it gave her something else. Fire. By 16, Camila was quoting state penal codes in youth court. By 26, she was the youngest attorney to win a civil rights case against a billion-dollar development firm, not for fame or revenge, but for every neighbor whose voice was buried beneath paperwork and policy. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about how the system taught a brown girl her worth by underestimating her, and how she turned that insult into a revolution. They didn't see a girl. They saw a nuisance in a hoodie. When Camila Vargas stood up in that courtroom, barely 16, barely 5 feet tall, with a backpack that looked heavier than she did, the prosecutor smirked. The judge adjusted his glasses, half curious, half dismissive. A bailiff rolled his eyes. In their world, people like her didn't speak, let alone challenge. But Camila had stopped believing in their world years ago. Her best friend, Devon, 14, was facing charges of grand theft, accused of stealing an electric scooter outside a convenience store, but he hadn't touched it. The footage was blurry. The arrest was rushed. The witnesses conflicted. Devon's only real crime? He was black, wearing a hoodie, and standing near something white people valued. His public defender didn't ask questions. The DA offered a plea: serve 6 months in juvenile detention or face a 2-year sentence. Devon almost signed. Camila stopped him. She'd spent the past week reviewing Georgia's juvenile code, studying probable cause, and watching 3 hours of grainy security footage frame by frame. She'd requested the arresting officer's body cam footage, which couldn't be located. Still, what she found was enough. When she asked to speak during the preliminary hearing, the room reacted like she had thrown a brick through a stained glass window. "Who are you exactly?" the judge asked, voice sharp with authority. "I'm Camila Vargas," she replied. "I'm here on behalf of the defendant. I want to present material evidence that the court has overlooked." Laughter rippled behind her. Someone whispered, "Cute." The judge sighed. "This isn't debate club, young lady." But Camila didn't flinch. She opened her folder with trembling hands, but her voice didn't shake. "Your Honor, the arrest record cites visual identification as the primary basis for detainment," she began. However, the arresting officer admitted during intake that the subject was not holding or riding the scooter, only standing near it. She flipped to a page. Furthermore, Georgia Code 15-11-602 explicitly states that a juvenile arrest must be supported by direct, articulable suspicion tied to specific conduct, not merely proximity to alleged property. The smirk left the prosecutor's face. She continued, turning toward the judge, her voice gaining weight. "I request a suppression of the arrest for insufficient probable cause, and a review of surveillance footage from the corner store's east-facing camera, which was never submitted but clearly shows another suspect, an adult male, leaving the scene moments earlier." The courtroom was dead silent. No whispers, no laughter. Even the bailiff stopped chewing gum. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're not licensed. You know that, right?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I'm not here as a licensed attorney. I'm here as someone who still believes this court serves justice, not shortcuts." A pause. Then, "Motion to suppress will be considered." We'll reconvene in 2 days. Devon turned to her, eyes wide. You just bought me time, he whispered. Camila didn't smile. She simply nodded. Because she knew this wasn't a win. It was a crack. A small, jagged crack in a wall that had held back voices like hers for decades. That night, Camila sat cross-legged on the floor of their cramped apartment. Her mother was still at work. Her abuela slept in the next room, oxygen machine humming softly. Camila stared at the stack of legal documents in her lap, highlighted, annotated, printed with ink they could barely afford. She wasn't doing this to be a hero. She was doing it because she had to, because her father had been deported in a system that never asked him to speak. Because algorithms tracked her classmates. No one could explain because her neighborhood got helicopters, not health care. They called her a kid with a cause. They were wrong. She was a storm in waiting. And now, the courtroom had heard her thunder. They called it an efficiency upgrade. The Atlanta Department of Youth Services had quietly adopted a predictive policing algorithm, software meant to flag at-risk youth before they committed a crime. On paper, it was innovation. In practice, it was a digital noose. Camila learned about it when her neighbor, Auntie Kendra, was arrested. The charge? Welfare fraud. The evidence? A flagged transaction, a $500 deposit from her nephew, meant to cover his half of the rent. The algorithm flagged it as income misrepresentation. Within 48 hours, she was in cuffs. No trial, no lawyer, just a machine's judgment. Camila knew something wasn't right. Kendra worked 2 jobs, filed everything on time, and had receipts. But every official she contacted shrugged and pointed to the system. So Camila went after the system. She spent nights researching. The software was developed by a private tech firm, contracted by the city through a loophole that exempted it from public disclosure. Its code was proprietary, and its data was hidden. But its consequences were real, and always landed hardest on black and brown neighborhoods. Of 112 people flagged by the program in the past year, 94% were non-white. None of the flagged cases resulted in felony convictions. Most never even reached court. But lives were still ruined, jobs lost, families evicted, children taken. Camila wasn't a lawyer yet. She didn't have a badge or a degree, but she had truth, and that was enough. She gathered testimony from other families affected by the program. A 13-year-old was labeled high risk for walking home with a group of friends. A single father was flagged for loitering in high-theft zones because he took the same bus route daily. A pregnant teen was denied housing assistance because the system had anomalies in her spending. Camila presented her findings at a city oversight hearing. She was alone, with no backup, just a USB drive, a stack of handwritten notes, and a fire behind her eyes. She began with one sentence. Your algorithm isn't keeping us safe. It's keeping us silent. The room shifted. Some smirked. Others leaned in. She clicked her slides. Map overlays of flagged zones, conveniently matching low-income housing districts. Demographic breakdowns of flagged individuals, disproportionately young, poor, and non-white. Internal emails, leaked by a whistleblower, reveal that city officials are asking if the system can be calibrated to reduce visibility in upcoming election cycles. That last slide got their attention. The committee chair interrupted. Miss Vargas, are you alleging deliberate bias? Camila didn't blink. I'm not alleging it. I'm proving it. She read a quote from one flagged report. Subject displays behavior consistent with future risk based on social cluster behavior. What does that mean? she asked the room. That he lives in a poor zip code? Does his cousin have a record? Does his face make your algorithm nervous? No one had an answer. By the time she finished, the room was still. No applause, just wait, and a silence that felt like the beginning of something. The next morning, headlines read, "Teen exposes bias in city surveillance program. Is predictive policing just code for discrimination? The system that sees color first, truth second." City officials called it a misunderstanding. The tech firm issued a non-apology. But Auntie Kendra's charges were dropped. And for Camila, that was enough. Not because it fixed the system, but because for once, someone heard her and acted. That night, sitting on the roof of their apartment building, Camila stared at the city lights. Her abuela brought her tea and placed it beside her without speaking. The old woman didn't need to ask what happened. She could feel it, the shift, the crack in the concrete. Camila whispered, almost to herself, "They don't see us, abuela, but we see each other." Her grandmother touched her shoulder. It was enough. Tomorrow, another fight would come. Another lie dressed as policy. Another friend accused by a machine with no soul. But tonight, just for a moment, she allowed herself to feel something rare. Victory. Not loud, not final, but real. Because when you fight for the invisible, the hardest thing to believe is that you're not alone. The eviction notice wasn't printed on cheap paper. It came on glossy cardstock, thick as a lie. "Notice of redevelopment," it read. "You have 30 days to vacate. Cantera Development Group has acquired this property." Camila knew the name. Cantera was a billion-dollar firm with white-collar lawyers and gold-plated donors. They bought low-income housing, applied new paint, installed digital locks, and then tripled the rent. Their favorite neighborhoods were ones where English wasn't the first language, and no one knew how to fight back. This time, they'd picked the wrong block. The building housed 23 families, immigrants, single mothers, night shift workers, people who built the city but were never allowed to own it. Camila's client, Senora Ruiz, was 74. She'd lived in her rent-controlled apartment for 41 years, raised 5 kids there, and lost 2. Her lease was still valid, but Cantera didn't care. "They said the building was unsafe," Ruiz whispered, holding the notice in her shaking hands. "But last week, they showed white couples the 3rd floor. They called it charming and transitional." Camila's jaw tightened. She'd seen this before. It wasn't a renovation. It was erasure. The lawsuit began as a whisper. A single injunction was filed to delay eviction. But Camila had a plan. She unearthed documents proving that Cantera had pressured city inspectors to declare the building structurally unsound, despite it having passed inspection 2 months earlier. She found internal emails, one where a Cantera executive wrote, "If we get the Ruiz lady out, the rest will fall like dominoes." Then she dug deeper. Property records, campaign donations, tax loopholes, and finally, a link between Cantera and the City Housing Board's chair. Silent partners, dirty contracts. She had enough to go to war. Her case centered on 2 things: retaliatory eviction of rent-controlled tenants to exploit market loopholes, systemic targeting of non-English-speaking residents using legalese and intimidation. Cantera sent a team of 4 attorneys to crush her. They laughed when they saw her, 26, without a private office and wearing the same brown flats she had worn since law school. But they stopped laughing in court. Camila didn't pace. She didn't shout. She built. Brick by brick, page by page. She presented affidavits from tenants. City memos show contradictory building reports. A signed email from Cantera's VP stating, "Use the code enforcement angle. It gets around rent laws." The courtroom held its breath. Then came her final blow. A witness. A former Cantera building manager who testified that he was ordered to cut heat to the top floor during winter to encourage move-outs. Gasps, shouts. A mother cried in the back row. Camila turned to the judge. "This isn't redevelopment. This is corporate displacement. Legalized exile. They're not investing in communities. They're flipping their graves." Silence. The judge called for a recess. 2 weeks later, Camila won. The eviction was overturned. Cantera was fined $3.4 million. The building was placed under third-party oversight. Reporters swarmed her on the courthouse steps. "Miss Vargas, what made you take this case?" Camila looked at the cameras and then at Senora Ruiz, who stood in the crowd, eyes full of tears, holding a small Puerto Rican flag. "I didn't take this case," Camila said. "It found me, like thousands of others will." The headlines came fast. 26-year-old attorney brings down corporate giant. From eviction to empowerment, the Camila Vargas case. Justice has a new voice, and it speaks Spanish, too. But Camila didn't stay for the spotlight. That Saturday, she was back in a community center, handing out flyers, translating housing forms, and teaching a free workshop on Tenant Rights 101. Because for her, victory wasn't a verdict. It was a door that was staying open. It was hot in winter, a home not lost. And she knew. The real fight wasn't over. It was only growing. Camila never wanted a firm. She wanted a front porch. Not marble halls or glass towers, but plastic folding chairs and a coffee pot in the back. A place where no one had to wear a suit to be heard. That's how Rooted Rights was born. Camila hosted open-table legal clinics every Saturday in the basement of a local church with chipped paint and stained pews. Camila hosted open-table legal clinics. No appointments, no fees, no IDs required. Just bring your story, and someone would write it down, sometimes for the first time. Immigrant mothers, undocumented teens, day laborers were paid in cash and threats. People with no voice in court, no time to wait, and no one who believed them. Camila believed them all. She called her model radical proximity. Not law from above, but beside. Not defending from distance, but from within. Rooted Rights grew fast because the pain was always there, waiting to be named. By its 6th month, the group had expanded to 3 satellite hubs, one in a converted barber shop, another in a tribal community center, and the last in a former halfway house Camila refused to let the city demolish. Volunteers powered each site, including retired paralegals, bilingual students, and former defendants who had become advocates, whom Camila had trained herself. "Justice isn't a file," she told them. "It's a feeling. And when you walk into that room, your job is to protect it." She didn't take every case to court. She didn't need to. Sometimes, the battle was as small as helping someone understand a lease and/or stopping an illegal deportation order by sending one correctly worded letter. But there were nights, too, when her hands shook. When the paperwork piled up, the phones rang non-stop, and the threats came more often than she admitted. The graffiti on her car. "Go back." The voicemail at 3 a.m. "We know where your mother lives." The letter with no return address. "You're making things worse." But Camila didn't stop, because she remembered her father, and every person like him who was silenced without a trial, a translator, or a second chance. She had something they didn't expect. Roots. Deep ones. The case that changed everything came on a rainy Thursday. A young Diné woman, Marisa, walked barefoot, holding a folder soaked through. Her tribal ID was rejected at a clinic. She had no health coverage, and her son had been taken by Child Protective Services after a neighbor reported her for neglect. Camila read the report. It was a lie. Marissa was working double shifts. She left her son with her aunt, but because the aunt wasn't registered in the system, CPS claimed abandonment. Camila took the case personally. She drove 5 hours to the reservation, met the aunt, brought cultural advocates to testify, and forced the court to recognize the tribal sovereignty that Marissa's file had ignored entirely. When the judge ruled to return custody, Marissa wept into Camila's shoulder. Her son ran down the aisle of the courtroom barefoot. No applause, no reporters, just justice, the way it should be. By the time Camila turned 27, Rooted Rights had helped over 3,000 people. Most had never been inside a law office. Many had stopped believing justice was possible at all. She never trademarked the name, never turned it into a brand, because Rooted Rights wasn't a business, it was a promise. "We are not broken," she told her team. "We are unheard, and silence is something we can fight." Every Saturday, she continued to show up, not as a savior, but as a sister, a daughter, a neighbor. And when people asked her why, after everything, after threats, lawsuits, exhaustion, she chose to stay in the basement instead of climbing higher. Camila always said the same thing, because the law belongs here, and so do we. It wasn't a case, it was a warning shot in the form of a bill. Senate Bill 431, the Domestic Stability and Immigration Reform Act. On cable news, they called it common sense policy. In fine print, it stripped non-citizens of access to public defenders in immigration-related cases. No lawyer, no translator, no due process, just silence. The law was written by lobbyists and sponsored by senators, funded by private detention companies. It was fast-tracked under the guise of border control, even though it had nothing to do with the border and everything to do with control. Camila read the bill in a single sitting. Twice. Then she stood up from her desk and whispered, "No." When the bill reached the floor, it had enough votes to pass. What it didn't have was a face to stand against it, until Camila stood up and made herself visible. She didn't go as a lawyer. She went as a witness. At the Senate Judiciary hearing, she carried no briefcase, just a folder of stories, testimonies from clients who would have been silenced under this law. A father who fought deportation after witnessing a murder. A mother was detained after calling 911 during a domestic assault. A child who would have never seen his parents again, if not for the legal aid she gave them. She didn't use outrage, she used precision. "Let me be clear," Camila told the room. "You are not voting on immigration. You are voting whether due process is a luxury or a right." Senator Carr, the bill's sponsor, leaned in with a cold smile. "We are a nation of laws, Miss Vargas." Camila held his gaze. "Then let's act like it." The room went quiet. 8 hours of questioning, gaslighting, data battles, and subtle threats followed. But Camila never blinked. She wasn't speaking for herself. She was channeling millions who didn't get a microphone. When the hearing adjourned, no one applauded. But the cameras rolled, and the country watched. Within 48 hours, the bill stalled. Within 72 hours, it was pulled. But Camila wasn't celebrating. "Temporary wins," she told her team at Rooted Rights. "The system's not broken. It's working exactly as it was built. We're here to build something else." A year later, she was nominated for a National Civil Rights Award. She turned it down. "I'm not a hero," she said in a rare interview. "I'm a relay runner, My job is to carry the story as far as possible, and then pass the baton. Her days were still the same. Folding chairs, late nights, courtrooms that smelled of sweat and lost hope. But her impact had grown roots. By age 29, Rooted Rights had established 12 branches nationwide. Her legal strategy was being taught at Columbia. Her fight against SB 431 became a case study in law schools. One of her former clients was now a paralegal, teaching workshops in Arizona. One afternoon, a boy stopped her on the sidewalk as she left a courthouse in Oakland. He couldn't have been older than 10. Hoodie, mismatched sneakers, wide, curious eyes. "Are you the lawyer who helped people like us?" Camila knelt and smiled. "That's the goal." He nodded solemnly. "I'm gonna be like you." She didn't cry, not then, but she felt it, deep, grounding. Camila's story isn't rare. That's the tragedy. But her choice to rise, resist, and return to the same streets where injustice began is what makes her unforgettable. She didn't fight for glory. She fought so that someone else's child wouldn't be silenced like her father was. And now we ask you, what would you do if the law forgot your name? Leave a comment. Share this story. Let us hear you. Because silence protects power. But storytelling, that protects us. Subscribe to the channel Hub Talk now if you're ready for more stories that demand to be felt, not just heard. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.